From the legendary Escher demos, the Beatles with an early version of Back in the USSR, which became the lead-off track on the group's 1968 release, simply called The Beatles, but more commonly referred to as the White Album. Well, 50 years later, Apple gives us a super deluxe box set of the whole shebang, crammed with demos and outtakes and a freshly minted remaster and remix by Giles Martin, son of the White Album's original producer, George Martin. Joining us to talk about this new release and the 1968 album itself is Beatles author and expert and frequent guest on the program, Robert Rodriguez. Robert, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, David. Great to be here once again.
Well, we're always glad to have you. You know, recently I was listening to an older discussion of ours from 3 or 4 years ago, and we were lamenting that Apple had all of this great material in the vault, and while we've heard a lot of it on bootlegs, you know, it hasn't seen any official release, and we were saying they were leaving money on the table. Well, I think beginning last year with the Sgt. Pepper box set, and now with the new White Album box set, it seems like Apple finally got the message from fans.
Yes, it seems like they're being curated, if not by somebody that's actually a fan, at least accessing somebody who maybe is giving them some input on what they should be putting out. Because, yes, it's a big spike in really gearing something that's going to be toward hardcore interest rather than just, slamming for the fences, doing mainstream, dumbing things down, as it were, which had been long their habit.
So let's get into this. What were your first impressions of the new 50th anniversary White Album deluxe box set?
Very positive. You can nitpick to death things that, they should have done this, should have done that. And overall, I'm quite satisfied with it. I was long looking forward to a remix of pretty much all the Beatle product, really. Going back to the Yellow Submarine song track, where they started really showing the possibilities of what they could do. And so I was very happy, and I will be appreciative that they made the effort and they did what they did, which is not to say that I'm 100% pleased with the results, but that's kind of a singular perspective, and maybe because, I've got decades of being steeped in this and soaking it into my DNA, that, you are going to hear it a little bit differently than somebody who's new to the party, or, somebody like my 16-year-old son who's just starting to get some awareness of this stuff. If this is the version that he hears and assimilates into his musical vocabulary, that's perfectly fine, and he won't have issues that some other fans might have.
I will say that I think I like it better than their Pepperbox from last year.
That seems to be a consensus, that they definitely, I don't know if they took heed from some of the criticism of that, but I know there was a lot of criticism of what they did with the mixing on Pepper in terms of, the bass and the drums in particular. And I've not seen that with this. Overall, people seem to be pretty satisfied that they've mixed it with an ear toward giving it some breathing space and putting you in the room. And that I cannot complain about that. That's a positive thing.
So what I thought we'd do is we'd each pick 3 tracks from this box set, talk about them, play the tracks, and in doing so, it would give the audience kind of an overview of what to expect from this package. So you're the guest, so why don't you go first?
Well, sure. And I will make one more comment as far as the outtakes goes. I think just as going into the Pepper Deluxe package, when that was being anticipated and people were speculating about what would be in it and what would be sort of the outtake stuff, Carnival of Light was the thing that seemed to be an obvious inclusion as something that was cut within the Pepper sessions. No one's going to mistake it for a great overlooked lost Beatle gem, because it's not that. And you could certainly provide the context, but to me, it would have been enlightening just to kind of get that insight into where the Beatles' heads were as they're crafting Pepper. This is another side of them that wouldn't really see full flower till Revolution 9, a year or so later. But they didn't include that, and my thought was, well, if not now, then when? And so it was with the White Album package that I think a lot of people were saying, oh, great, we're going to get to hear the 27-minute version of Helter Skelter.
Right.
But people, I think, have a very mistaken notion of what that is. Yes, the familiar White Album version, the fast version where it goes in and out at the end, where it's clearly, edited a bit, the 27-minute version is not the fast one. It's the boom, boom, plotting one that you heard on Anthology 3. who wants to hear 27 minutes of that? I don't. I'd rather have the space filled up with something else.
It's
so
true.
They were generous enough to give us 13 minutes of it, whatever they did. So I'm perfectly fine with that.
Well, maybe they're waiting for 2027 so that they can release a Magical Mystery Tour 60th anniversary package and then throw Carnival of Light on that.
Ooh, wouldn't that be sweet?
And let's all hope we live long enough to see it. So your first track to talk about.
Okay, my first track to talk about is, I'm going to start with Savoy Truffle.
Okay.
And now this is something that ever since I became aware of the mono mixes and got familiar with them, which was a while ago, it was sort of amazing to me that for all the attention that the Beatles supposedly paid to the mono mixes, which certainly was true for the years that was the prevailing currency, certainly the earliest albums and singles, through about where they started getting a lot more layered in their approach to recording, circa Revolver, then Pepper. That's where I think the stereo really started to come into its own. And so when I first heard the mono White Album, it's always interesting to hear the variants. Like we were first exposed to on the Beatles Rarities album, 1980.
Right.
Where they gave us that shortened version of Helter Skelter and Don't Pass Me By and Sped Up and all that.
Right.
And they're interesting novelties. I don't know how anybody can listen to that and think, oh, yeah, this is definitely superior to the stereo version, especially when you're getting less Helter Skelter.
Right.
It doesn't come back. Who'd want that?
Right.
But one of the things about Savoy Truffle was it's interesting to hear that mix. And once the Sirius channel, the Beatles channel started up, Channel 18, it always sort of irritated me that they would play the mono Savoy Truffle all the time. Because if you're a listener that knows the difference, it sounds like a thought experiment in that there's these noises that pop in and out of the mix, and then the guitar solo, that very last note that closes the solo, it kind of like, it sounds like he chokes on it or something. It's
right.
Not clean. And it's like, why would you prefer that to the stereo one? If they'd done the stereo mix in mono, but it's the same elements, and sounds like the stereo version, only it's in mono, that might have been okay. Instead, you get this thing that's just kind of a noisy track that detracts from the overall song. So when I was looking forward to hearing the White Album, the remix, I was thinking, what are they going to do with this? And I have to say, I'm glad of the remixing that they did that gives, some other elements in the recordings, some you're able to access them in ways that you didn't hear before.
Right.
But I have to say, and maybe it's just my prejudice from being, acclimated to a certain version, I didn't think the new mix of it was an improvement. I thought it was sort of distracting certain things that almost seemed to be randomly thrown in there. And it was just a little bit, not quite as noisy as the mono version, but it was definitely something I thought, it's not as sharp as the stereo one, even though it's remixed and it's in stereo.
I think it's better, quieter.
I do too.
One of many, many outtakes from the White Album included in this 50th anniversary super deluxe box set, and we're chatting with Beatles author and expert podcaster as well, host of Something About the Beatles, Robert Rodriguez. So I'll give you my first pick from this, and it's from the Escher demos, and it's a funny thing because sometimes I guess as fans we get maybe a little blasé about these things, because if you're like me, and I know you are, you've heard a lot of this material, you've had it for years in inferior sound quality, certainly to what we have now. And I have grown to appreciate Child of Nature. That's the song I've picked. Obviously, Imagine is on everyone's minds because we got the deluxe set of that. And Jealous Guy is a song that I have always felt, and it's, I guess, not a popular opinion, that it's just a wee bit overproduced.
My God, you just read my mind.
It's just a little too saccharine. And I just wish that we had Jealous Guy in the form that it is on the Escher demos, but with the Jealous Guy lyrics and not the Child of Nature lyrics. Although I do appreciate them because it does tell that story. The Beatles had gone off to India and they were incredibly inspired. I just wish Jealous Guy was more like this rather than how it wound up becoming, although I like the lyric on Imagine better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or Plastic Ono Band version of
Oh,
Jealous Guy.
yeah.
With some real angst in the vocal, as he's singing about something he obviously has an emotional connection to. But yeah, I'm totally with you there. A pretty melody. Yeah, I like the words better as they ended up in the final state. But I was never crazy about the production on Imagine generally, and that song in particular.
Right. And there is something spooky almost, I will say, on this, where, it's on the road to Rishikesh, the way it's drawn out, it's creepy. Was the area of India you went to haunted? I mean,
channeling Burt Lahr.
Right. Exactly.
It is a great snapshot of that, basically what evolved into a songwriting camp in Rishikesh.
Right.
And you can really picture them sort of around a campfire or wherever they were doing in the circumstance of writing these songs. I had done a show that was based on my Monmouth talk on the Esher demos, and it wasn't until I was doing some background research and then just adding up some numbers, but that was an incredibly productive year in terms of songwriting.
Right.
What they wrote in Rishikesh, what was later on demoed after that and recorded that year. I mean, the most productive year of their career in terms of songwriting. Certainly some things got shelved and recorded during the solo years, but if you add it all up, not even 63, 64 equals that in just volume of songs. And so clearly, meditation and being away from distractions really agreed with them.
Absolutely. And again, I'm just thrilled that they made this its own disc. They've given us everything that we know of that exists from those demos. There may, in fact, be more, but we're not sure.
True. That's the rumor. There's a 28th demo from Esher, and the identity has not been divulged, but that's what we know exists. And it's an example where I think they did right by the Beatles recording in cleaning it up a bit, doing a job and trying to sync some of the, greatly out of sync, faulty tracks that were going on. Not 100%, just enough. It still has that homemade charm to it. But it's wonderful. That's something I could say without reservation. They did a great job on.
Exactly. So what would be your second pick from the box?
Well, while we're on Esher, I would say the new revelatory demo of Sour Milk Sea that we didn't know about.
Yes. I don't know when Jackie Lomax entered the picture, but I don't know if that was written specifically for Jackie Lomax. Was that a song George had around and was Well, I guess he was demoing it for the group.
Yeah, he was demoing it, but you don't know if his intent was, yes, the group, I would like to pitch this to the group, or while I'm demoing my material, let me get this on tape so I can give it then to Jackie. We're not really clear on if he had already earmarked it for Jackie at that early stage. We do know that they were well into the White Album sessions before any George Harrison compositions got recorded by the group. So by that time, Sour Milk Sea was already in the can. That was recorded in June.
Right.
Pretty early on in the White Album sessions. So it seems likely he decided up front that Jackie had been one of the first Apple signings, but not as a performer, as a songwriter. So ironically, the first thing he records is a song he didn't write.
Right.
But they did this great Threedles recording of it with Clapton, with Nicky, and it seemed like, I think George was trying to put his best foot forward with a song that he believed to be commercial. It certainly was fresh to him in that it was a song about meditation, where it just comes straight out of Rishikesh. And, he was convinced this was going to be the song to launch Jackie. And what is interesting, though, is given that there is so little similarity in the vocal style of George Harrison and Jackie Lomax, Jackie being this R&B rooted belter,
right,
sort of a blue-eyed soul type of guy. And George, you listen to his demo, which is cool because it's George, and it is the kind of sound that you're used to hearing out of him, which is a different vocal style entirely. It's possible that if he envisioned the song to be grittier, he recognized that he wouldn't be able to do it justice. Just as, as a revelatory thing coming out of this White Album package, I talked to Chris Thomas, and he's talking about when they were getting ready to track Piggies after he discovered the harpsichord in Studio One at EMI. And while they're sitting around, George starts playing something, which was not yet finished, but he had the melody down. He starts playing it on the harpsichord. And Chris Thomas is like, wow, that's a great song. And he's kind of like, why don't we record that one instead? And George is like, Well, I was thinking about giving it to Ray Charles. Wasn't even thinking of it in terms of a Beatles song at that point.
Hello. Hello.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The next cut for me, this is a really short one, and I just chose it because it brings up an interesting point. It's all of about 42 seconds. It's the Beatles jamming on "You're So Square, Baby, I Don't Care." And when I listened to this, first of all, I wish we had the whole thing. I mean, it must have been part of like some long jam, but they are so tight on this, and they are really, really rocking, and you have to wonder what the heck happened between this and January of '69 when they're tackling the same kind of material with not even half the gusto that they're doing here.
Yeah, quite a difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
And see, that's the kind of thing that I don't know how much of that exists in the vaults from the summer of '68, but it really belies the notion that they were at each other's throats and falling apart and not wanting to work together. The thing that I get from the package, I mean, and this comes from, the research I've been doing on the White Album sessions, is that they were really, really making this effort to get back to being a band and playing as a band,
right,
as opposed to what the sessions were for Pepper. This was, and Ringo flat out said it, I really like the White Album because it was us playing as a band again. They hadn't toured in 2 years, and the stuff for Revolver was much more band-oriented in terms of the recording. And here they were doing it again and recording all the rehearsals to get the take that they would then overdub and create the master out of. So you get a lot of the sense of that in the performances, if you're really listening, and with this bonus material, that they definitely were enjoying playing together and reminding themselves who they were.
Hold it, fellas.
The fact that they convened as a group together in advance at George's house to demo this material, that was not something they needed to do. I think that they did that because they really wanted to just get that band spirit going again, and that was a way of starting the immersion process into what they knew, given all the material they produced, and that they wanted to record all of it. It was going to be a long journey, but I think they went into it with high spirits as a band instead of, if it was truly the sound of, John in a backing band, Paul in a backing band, George in a backing band, why would they have bothered to communally record those demos? Right. They didn't need to. They just walked in with their own stuff and laid it on them. But no, I think that was the intent all along. And plus this sort of assertion of their autonomy. It's a year after Brian's died, and so they're starting to take care of their own business affairs, which they were woefully unqualified to do.
Right.
But also I think they were seizing some control back from George Martin, who was longing to do some sort of successor to Pepper. And instead, nope, they're going back to their roots and making him kind of redundant in the studio. So it was sort of they're asserting their free will in the face of the sort of parental controls that had been on them to that point.
So what would be your third and final cut to highlight?
Well, to keep the George theme going, which was not by design, it just sort of worked out that way. The one song, well, maybe I should say the first song of this new package that really caught my ears as far as really showing the optimum take on what could be done by taking these old elements and then just, applying 21st century technology and doing a sort of savvy mix to what you've got to work with. It was long. It was a lo-fi recording,
exactly. Yep.
For 50 years, and now suddenly every element of this fantastic performance, George's acoustic and Paul's great bass and organ playing and Ringo's phenomenal drumming on this track, the singing, Chris Thomas's piano, all the elements are there, and it's really giving it a power, and it really pushes this transcendental spirituality innate to this track. Instead of it being sort of in the shadows, it's now basking in the sunlight, as it should be.
Yeah, it always sounded like it was a track on that album that was happening in a different room.
Right.
And now it's, that one I did, A.B., when I heard it, because I said, whoa, this is louder. I mean, this is, it's still kind of a peaceful cut, especially in the beginning, but my God, it pops on this, on this release.
Yeah.
And, it's in my top 5 favorite Beatles songs of all time. Long. This is my highlight of the White Album. It's my favorite George song with the Beatles, no question. And it wasn't until recently that I found out that he had based it around the chord progressions of Bob Dylan's Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands.
Yep.
That I had no idea, and when I heard it, that was a mind blower. And I thought, this is still just a masterpiece that I wouldn't say waiting to happen, but waiting for other people to discover it. And maybe they will on this box with the way it's been mixed.
That is exactly it. It's amazing. I've been on your show half a dozen times or so, and this sort of Venn diagram and taste is really coming through in this show. I would definitely put it in my top 5 as well, and for a lot of the reasons you cite. And yeah, the Dylan connection it's pretty uncanny. But yes, once you recognize it, it's like, oh my God. And it's sort of like, if you know that If I Needed Someone was inspired by Bells of Rimini by the Byrds or something,
right.
It doesn't detract from it. It's really him sort of taking those elements and, putting the pieces in a different order or something and coming up with something great despite what original flash of inspiration there had been. And it's perfectly valid. Dylan does Fourth Time Around after hearing Norwegian Wood. It's perfectly fine. That's what you want to see artists do that are on this peer level, is sort of, get the synergy going between them and inspire them and take it in a different direction. So it's perfectly fine. And it is historically has been such an overlooked track. So yeah, if it gets some extra glory now, finally, that's the thing about George, is his music sneaks up on you.
Right.
I think out of all 4 Beatles, what he lacks in immediacy, he more than makes up in the long game, in terms of you sort of mature into appreciating what George does.
That'll get me to my last track, and it's from one of the bonus, outtake collections, those 2 discs of all that stuff, and it's Take 10, I have to be clear on this, Take 10 with I don't know, it's all sorts of crazy stuff, but anyway, I guess it's more commonly known as Goodnight with the attempted backing vocals. I think this is one of the early tracks that was leaked from the project, wasn't it?
Yes, in fact it was, yeah, and that was one of the things that sort of whetted everybody's appetites for, wow, that's mind-blowing, can't wait to hear what else they got.
Yeah, because I was thinking to myself, God, did I read this in Mark Lewison's complete recording sessions? Did I read about this and just forget? Because it just never occurred to me. And again, it's almost like what I said before about, as fans, if you're a hardcore fan and you've got the bootlegs, you can be somewhat blasé about these things and think, well, I'm just getting an upgrade on stuff that I've already heard. But I'd never heard this before. And even though they're kind of finding their way with the harmonies, it's just fun to think that they attempted it like this, and it, almost like This Boy or Yes It Is Part 3.
Right. But before they eventually got it together for Because the following year.
Right.
That's still a part of them. They want to, if there's a chance to implement the 3-part harmony thing, they'll go for it.
Good night.
I think I held a funny note.
I had heard, I don't know if it's true, it's in the rumor mill that if this does well, there will be an Abbey Road box set next year. I would think that regardless, there would be an Abbey Road box set, because next to Pepper, it's their most celebrated album. I don't know how they could pass that up at this point.
Right. The marketing opportunity, it suggests itself for sure. Now, what I've been wondering is, what do they have to work with? Because there are no Esher demos for Abbey Road per se. And, unless you throw in some great studio outtakes, which we got a taste of with Anthology 3 of them playing around with Ain't She Sweet. So maybe there is stuff out there that, just hasn't been circulated to this point. Sonically, I'm not sure how they could upgrade it much, because it's so wonderfully recorded to begin with. So it would be very interesting what they pick for that. And, of course, if they do the 50th anniversary package for Let It Be, you, of course, have a ton of stuff to work with.
Right.
All the Nagra reels and all the Apple Studio jamming and stuff like that. So that will be probably a hard one to pare down to a releasable length.
Well, Robert, this has been great, and I want to again mention the podcast, Something About the Beatles, and I know you had a best of show recently, so 2019 is shaping up probably to be a good year too.
Yeah, and there's no shortage of stories and avenues to explore with the Beatles. It's just this mind. Once you fall into it, man, there's a million different ways to go, and it'll keep going for as long as I can find things to talk about, which will be forever. So there you go.
Right. Oh, and by the way, because we introduce you as Beatles author and expert, are there any forthcoming books?
Well, funny you should ask. I've got two that are started. One I was originally going to, I had sort of earmarked November 2018 to have out my book on the White Album, which is called Beatles 68, How the White Album Deconstructed the Fab Four. And I decided midway through it that, you know what, I don't want this book to be obsolete the day it comes out, because so much more stuff is going to be coming out once that package drops. So now I'm kind of slow-walking it, and it may be out in 2019 if I finish everything that I want to explore on it. But, yeah, that's in the works, as well as something a little more aimed at the trivia people out there that just love the minutia, sort of collecting stuff from the 4 years of shows that isn't generally common knowledge and putting it in one package.
Ah, very, very good. Very good. You know what I'd like to see someday? I'd like to see Robert Rodriguez reviews every single Nagra reel from...
Yeah. Oh, man. I definitely need to start working out.
Right. Then you won't be... I don't think you'll be making it to the 60th anniversary of Magical Mystery Tour, if that's the case. Anyway, always great talking with you. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Always great. I'd have you anytime, as George once said.